Hello dear viewer and my student, welcome to your favorite program, The Knowledge Quest. And my name is Alex Obara, your teacher, and I'll be taking you through history and government. And today we are just proceeding from where we halted or stopped in our last discussion. And we are on the topic, the contacts between East Africa and the outside world up to the 19th century. And in our last discussions, of course, we discussed on the early visitors. We looked at the Arabs, and we discussed about the Indian Ocean trade. And thereafter, we went ahead and began to discuss about the Portuguese conquest and their role in East African coast. And we saw that the reason why the Portuguese are learning about the East African coast is because East African coast or East Africa had been exposed to the outside world through the Indian Ocean trade. And therefore, as a result, the Portuguese are also getting information about East African coast. And therefore, they begin to come to the East African coast. And we looked at some of the reasons why they came to East African coast, and I'll be taking you through them very quickly, even as we proceed. So the first one, the Portuguese had a desire to control the east coast of Africa and dominate the trade, all right? So they had about the trade which was taking place between East Africa and the outside world, and therefore that ignited their desire to take control of East Africa and dominate and control the trade. And then number two, we say they were also in the process of looking or seeking the maritime or the sea route to India. And as they were doing that, they came upon East Africa, and therefore they decided also to dwell in that place. And then number three, there was also the spirit of exploration, all right, the adventure in them. This was because of the Renaissance. We talked about after the Dark Ages, we had the Renaissance period where there was rebirth of knowledge. And therefore, as a result, they also wanted to discover more things and get more knowledge, and in the process, they came along East African coast. And then number four, we say there was the desire to spread Christianity and counter the growth of Muslim influence among the East African coast people. You realize that as the Arabs came to East Africa, they also came with their religion. They carried their religion along. And therefore, the religion was spreading very fast. And therefore, as a result also, the Portuguese came to counter, and as they were countering, also to spread their religion, which we said was Christianity in that case. And then number five, we said they wanted to form an anti-Muslim alliance, okay? Because Muslims, or the religion, the Islamic religion, was also spreading very fast. And apart from that, they were also carrying out slave trade. And therefore, they formed an anti-Muslim alliance which was advocating or which was fighting against the Muslim religion. And then we said also they were trying out to make contact with the legendary Christian king who was called Prester John, all right? He was said to rule part of the interior of Northeast Africa. So they wanted to know who this king was, and of course make contacts, and if possible be able to gain something out of the contacts that they were to make with this king. And then we also say that the coast of East Africa was of strategic importance. It was of strategic importance to the Portuguese in their quest to control business and of course control the world in large. And therefore it was going to act as a base for number one, resisting. It was to be a base for them to resist back those intruders who would want to control or would want to resist, or rather to, counter their influence. Number two, we said it was important for refueling their ships. Refueling their ships, in this case we said, it was important because of the natural harbors. All right. So these natural harbors, the Portuguese could dock their ship. They could be anchored there and then refuel and then proceed. So that's a strategic importance. Proceed with their voyages and explorations. And then also the issue of replenishing, that also is applied as a result of, the natural harbors. And then we said it was also going to act as a station for their naval patrols, where they could be able to patrol the sea so as to safeguard their merchant ships, because their ships could at times, be attacked by those people who had wrong intentions probably, all right? And therefore, these naval patrols would be able to safeguard and control them from pirates who could be interested in attacking their ship. And then the Portuguese also wanted to establish a commercial empire. They wanted to establish a commercial empire and to have the largest share in the eastern trade. A commercial empire is a business hub, all right? It's a business kind of empire where the largest share they wanted to belong to them. So they wanted to establish a commercial empire. It's like a kingdom which was mostly, participating in trade, and most of the shares could go to the Portuguese. All right, so that also becomes another reason why the Portuguese were so much interested in capturing and conquering the East African coast. And then we talked about the conquest, and we said the conquest for East African coast by the Portuguese was carried out in expeditions. In other words, they were done out in different levels and years. Okay, so we looked at the first three expeditions. The first one was carried out in the year 1487 to the year 1491 by Pedro de Covilla. He came and traveled east to gather information, and we said this was form of a reconnaissance, to find out and to spy and see how East African looks like. And then number two, we having the second expedition by Bartolomeo Diaz in the year 1488, who was able to round the Cape of Good Hope, and in the press, of course, also he stumbled upon East Africa. And then in the year 1494, a treaty was signed. This treaty was called the Treaty of Tordesillas, all right? And this was signed, and it kept the European powers away from the East. In other words, the Portuguese were trying to make East Africa their sole territory. So their desire to control East Africa is coming into play when they are signing a treaty called Tordesillas, which is keeping other European powers away from East Africa. All right? So that also is an indication that the Portuguese are trying to control or trying to gain control of the East African coast. In the year 1497, 8th of July, Vasco da Gama set out in his first exploration. Of course, these are very common name for most of us, that Vasco da Gama. We have pillars in Mombasa, in the coast, where you have Vasco da Gama pillars and all that. So Vasco da Gama is one of the explorers, of course, who came out in another expedition, which is set out in 1497 in the 8th of July. And on the 23rd of March 1498, Vasco da Gama arrived in Calicut. All right, that's of course along the East African coast. And in the year 1500, we had another expedition by Pedro Alvarez Cabral. All right, he led an expedition to the East African coast, and he also made an unsuccessful. So in his expedition, he was not successful. He made an unsuccessful attempt to capture Sofala and its gold trade. Sofala is an old town along the East African coast. So when Pedro Alvarez Cabral is coming, he also does that expedition and trying to capture the old cities to control trade in Sofala, but it was not successful. In 1502, Vasco da Gama returned, okay? He returned back to East Africa and he conquered. Now in this case, Vasco da Gama, after carrying out his reconnaissance, his first trip, he went back, and in 1502, he came and he was able to conquer Kilwa, and he forced Kilwa to acknowledge the rule of the King of Portugal, to play a large annual tributes. In other words, to pay money. So he forced the people of Kilwa to accept their king of Portugal to be the king of Kilwa. And as a result, they paid tribute. In other words, pay a large amount of money annually or each year to the king of Portugal. So you see, the Portuguese slowly, they're trying to entrench their rule in the East African coast. Now in 1503, Rui Lorenzo Ravasco attacked the islands of Zanzibar and Mafia, all right, or Mafia, the way you want to call it. So Rui Lorenzo Ravasco attacked the islands of Zanzibar and Mafia, forcing them to pay tribute to Portugal, all right? So they are easily, like we are saying, expedition after another, trying to take control of the East African coast. In 1505, Francisco de Almeida led an expedition to coast. And in his expedition, number one, he subdued Sofala. So in this case, where the first expedition, the first expeditor failed, in this case, Francisco de Almeida is able to subdue Sofala, and therefore you can say he's controlling gold trade. And then number two, Kilwa was burnt and looted. Okay, so in his quest to control, Kilwa is burnt and looted. And then Mombasa was burnt, looted, and eventually overpowered. So in this case, of course, again, you realize the Portuguese are entrenching their rule. So in 1506 to 1507, Tristan da Cunha attacked these following old cities. He attacked Oja, Brava, Lamu, Pate, and Socotra, and brought them under Portuguese rule. All right, so you see, bit by bit, expedition after another, the Portuguese are trying to entrench their rule. By 1509, Pemba, Mafia, and Zanzibar were taken. The whole of the Indian Ocean was controlled by Portugal. The work of conquest was complete. All right, so in this case now, the whole of the East African coast is under the Portuguese. And as you can note, like we said, these conquests were carried out in expedition, one after another. So that's how, in a nutshell, how the Portuguese were able to conquer and control the East African coast. Now, the question to ask ourselves, why were the Portuguese able to conquer the East African coast despite the fact that we had Arabs and we had the locals in that given area? So the first point is the Portuguese had superior naval and military technology. In other words, in terms of weapons and in terms of fighting in water, talking about naval, superior naval, we are talking about fighting through water. So they had more advanced and superior weapons, as opposed to those who were resisting against them, including the Africans, who had very inferior weapons to fight against them. So as a result, that put them on an higher hand or on upper hand of being able to conquer the East African coast. And then number two, apart from the military or the weapons and technology which they had, there was also advanced military tactics. All right? Those tactics came as a result of training. All right? So the Portuguese soldiers and military had the tactics which they had been trained, as opposed, of course, the Arabs and the East African people who never had enough tactics. So those advanced military tactics which came as a result of well-trained troops, and therefore the resistance could not be successful in that case. Therefore they were able to conquer. And then number three, there was the issue of disunity and political enmity of the coastal towns. The Portuguese exploited this disunity to conquer into towns. There is that aspect of divide and rule. So because these people were not united, it was easy for the Portuguese to use a tactic called divide and rule. And now when they are divided, it means they cannot offer a formidable force or defense. against their conqueror, in that case, who are the Portuguese. So the issue of political enmity or rivalry and disunity also played a negative role for the Africans and the East African people, but it was for the advantage of the Portuguese, who were able to conquer and control the East African coast. Then another reason why they were able to conquer very quickly is that their character. Most of the Portuguese were brutal, cruel, and ruthless. All right? Therefore, they were able to use very bad methods, including burning and looting. They burned and looted. All right? So therefore, people easily surrendered, because you see now, they rendered people homeless. They rendered them hungry. You know, it was not easy now for the people to resist after their homes were burnt down. So because of their character, in which they were brutal, cruel, and ruthless, by employing those brutal means of fighting the enemies in that case. Another reason why they were able to conquer and of course establish their rule is that the Portuguese got reinforcement from their headquarters at Goa in India. In other words, when they were fighting and you realize that they were overcome, the Portuguese could send more soldiers. That's what we call reinforcement. They will send more soldiers from India, and of course in Goa specifically, which was their headquarters in India. Another tactic which they used, which enabled them to conquer very quickly, they launched surprise attacks and caught the people or the coastal people unawares. All right, that's a tactic which is used in war, which is called ambushing. So they ambushed the people, caught them unaware, and prepared to resist. And therefore, those surprise attacks or ambush were able to, work for the advantage of the Portuguese, and therefore they launched, or they were able to conquer the East African coast. And then another reason is the weakness of the Turkish and Persian navies. You see, the Turkish and the Russian navies also were part of the team that were trying to control the East African coast, but they were weak. All right? In other words, they could not be able to offer resistance of equal measure against the Portuguese. So therefore, the Portuguese overcame them. And as a result of overcoming them, they launched and they were able to, establish their rule. And the eighth reason why also they were able to conquer is that the Portuguese were well versed with the coast, having obtained information from voyages made by explorers like Vasco da Gama. Remember, we said there were so many expeditions which were carried out, and people were coming, and their main agenda was to gather information. They were carrying out something we call the reconnaissance, to spy, to find information, to know the routes, to know where to go, where to attack, and all that. So they were well versed. They knew very well the coast. Therefore, it was easy for them to maneuver around, and as a result, they were able to establish their rule in the East African coast. These, we said, the information they obtained from the voyages made by early explorers like Vasco da Gama. Having looked at the eighth point, we now want to look at the Portuguese rule. How was it established? How did this rule take place after having been established? So, the first point I want you to note is that the Portuguese controlled the East African coast for a period of 200 years. That is a long time, 200 years. And they were in charge of the coastline of about 400 kilometers. All right? That was a big area, about 400 kilometers. And for the easier governance, the coastline was divided into two sections, and each was under an official who was entitled as a captain. All right, so because the area was big, 400 kilometers coastline, they divided the areas into two, and each area was under an official called a captain. So we have the area which was the north of Cape Delgado, which was ruled by a captain based at Malindi. right? So that's the first area. We say it was divided into two sections. So the first section was the area north of Cape Delgado, okay? And Cape Delgado was ruled by a captain based at Malindi. Of course, Malindi in the coast of Kenya. And then we had the second area, which was to the south of Cape Delgado, which was ruled by the captain of Mozambique, all right? Of course, Mozambique also in the coastline. So, counting all those kilometers from Mozambique, you see Mozambique is almost the south of Africa, and then to the East Africa in Malindi, that was a large extension. So those areas were divided in that way. And then these two captains, one in Malindi and another one in Mozambique, received instructions from the Portuguese viceroy or the captain general based at Goa in India. Goa is important because we said this was the headquarter. Okay, so the viceroy or the captain general was based in Goa in India, and he gave instructions to the captains in Mozambique and the captain in Malindi. All right, and then apart from that, we had the duties of these captains. Those captains in Mozambique and the captain in Malindi had their duties, and their duties included the following. The first one, collection of tribute. This tribute was in form of money, all right, or taxation. And this was from the form for local leaders or rulers who collected. And after it was collected, it was taken to the king in Portugal. All right, so that's the first one, collection of tribute. This was just paying tribute to the king. All right, like the king live forever, this is the money we give to our king. So paying tribute to the king, it was collected by the local rulers. Number two, the captains imposed custom duties on all imports and exports. In other words, if there were goods which were to be exported or to be imported to the East African coast, those goods were to be paid for. And that money is, of course, called custom duty. So they were imposing custom duties on all imports and exports in and out of East Africa. Then number three, the captains had a responsibility of quelling, suppressing. Quelling is to cool down. If there was a form of a resistance or a rebellion, the captains were supposed to suppress them, to quell them, to ensure that those resisting were put into silence. So sometimes you could have resistance or rebellions from the local people, all right? So the local people sometimes could resist because they did not have money for did not have custom duties, for example, and because these Portuguese were cruel, they were ruthless, so that people could resist. But if there was any kind of resistance, that resistance was to be quelled. It was supposed to be quelled or suppressed, all right, by the captains in Malindi and in Mozambique. And then the captains also had a role of supervising the ruling families in the coastal towns and monitoring their loyalty to the Portuguese. As we shall see, you realize the coastal towns had their rules in form of families. We had some families which were royal, which were ruling. And those families were supposed also to be loyal, all right? They were supposed to pay their allegiance to the king in Portugal, all right? So they was to supervise the ruling families in the coastal towns and monitor their loyalty to Portugal. Were they loyal? Were they paying allegiance or not? And if not, and then something was supposed to be done so as to ensure that they were loyal to the king. And then having looked at that, having looked at those duties, we look at the problems or which were faced by the Portuguese captains in their administration of their leadership, So the first one is the harsh or unfavorable climate. The harsh and unfavorable climate, of course, we'll discuss that in detail. The affliction by tropical diseases, I'll give you detail. Inadequate personnel and troops to garrison their strongholds, I will discuss that. And then constant rebellions and hostility from the local people. So we want to go for a short break, and once we'll come back, we'll be discussing on these problems in detail and see how they were hampering the rule of the captains in those two given areas. So let's go for a short break, and we'll be back to proceed with our discussions. See you shortly. How they conquered, how they were able to establish, and now we are looking on how they were ruling. And we've said the areas in which they were ruling was over a strip of 400 kilometers, all the way from the south of Cape Delgado to the north of Cape Delgado. And we say those areas were divided into two, each area ruled by captain, one captain based in Mozambique and another captain in Malindi. And having looked at that, we've seen their responsibilities, and now we are looking at the problems that they faced, the Portuguese captains faced in the administration of leadership in their given areas. And we have seen the first one, which I said we'll discuss, is the harsh or unfavorable climate. And of course, we know that Africa, or specifically East Africa, is found within the tropics. And being found within the tropics, it's a bit hot. Of course, compared to Europe and compared to Africa, Africa is a bit hot, and specifically areas within the tropics or the tropical areas. So the climate was unfavorable for them. Yeah, and therefore that hampered their movement. The hot sun that could burn their skin and bring sunburns, and of course that would make them uncomfortable in their quest to, control the East Africa. So it was harsh, there was harsh and unfavorable climate. Then there was affliction by tropical diseases. There are those diseases which are commonly found within the tropics. Examples is malaria, right? So those diseases, of course, again, afflicted them, making them weak and sometimes killing some. And therefore that hampered or became a problem of the administration of their leadership in those given areas. Then there was also the problem of inadequate personnel and troops. See, this area is so big, 400 kilometers stretch. We have not gone to the interior. That's the coastal stretch, 400 kilometers. And then this area is divided into two. To ensure this area is adequately governed and controlled, there was need for personnel. But it was not easy to have enough personnel in the administration of this given area. And therefore, in other words, also the troops and to garrison their stronghold. In other words, to take care of those strongholds, to control those strongholds was also a challenge, okay? And then there was also another problem of constant rebellions and hostility by the local people. And as we've said, the Portuguese rule was not very favorable. It wasn't favorable, number one, because of their character. They were brutal, they were cruel, they were harsh, all right? To the East African, imagine somebody coming to your home where you rightfully belong and then rule you using an iron fist. That is really not very favorable. There people resisted, and in the process of resisting, it became a challenge. It was a problem to the captains because of the continual resistance of the coastal communities and specifically the local people. And therefore, as a result of this, the captains and the Portuguese opted to construct what we refer to as the Fort Jesus. So in the year 1593, the Portuguese constructed the Fort Jesus. Of course, today if you go to Mombasa, you'll be able to see the Fort Jesus, right? So we want to look at why the Fort Jesus was constructed in the year 1593. So the first one, the Fort Jesus acted as a watchtower for spotting enemies, okay? In other words, it was raised. And therefore, because most of the enemies could come via water or the sea, it was easy for the Portuguese to spot the enemies from afar off and therefore help them to fight back or to organize themselves and fight back their enemies, all right? So it acted as a watchtower for spotting the enemies. Number two, it acted as a hiding place against their enemies. So Fort Jesus had different hiding positions. It was not so easy for you to come in and quickly spot your enemy. So therefore, it acted as a place that they could hide in case their enemy attacked. So it was a hiding place. Number three, it acted as a military base, a place where they could store, okay, their weapons or armaments. So if you go, of course, to the East African coast, specifically go to the Fort Jesus, you will be able to see some of the armory or some of the armaments which were used by the Portuguese then, which was stored in the Fort Jesus. So it acted as a military base. Number four, it was a base of administration. In other words, it is in this place that it was like the headquarters. It was like not the White House, in the State House in Kenya now. It was the base of administration. It was where that power could be administered from. In other words, the captain could live there, all right? So it was the base of administering the rule. And then it was also acted as a prison for captives. Yeah, so those who were caught resisting, those who were caught having not paid allegiance, those who were caught having broken the laws, were captured and they were taken there as a prison for the captives. And also number six, it acted as a base for sending punitive expeditions against resisting people. Talking about punitive expeditions, these were soldiers who were sent out to punish, or rather to enforce their rule against those people who are resisting. So it was here that the military or the expeditions could be given instruction on how they are going to expedite or to carry out their punitive expeditions against the local people. And then the seventh reason for constructing the Fort Jesus, it was a resting place. That is a place where the soldiers and the military and of course those who are carrying out the administration could go and have a rest. After having a very busy day, they could go and have a rest at the Fort Jesus. Now eventually you realize that the Portuguese now started declining. Much as they were able to establish it, the Portuguese rule again began to decline. So in our next discussion, we are going to look at the decline of the Portuguese rule. Of course, we say they ruled for a period of 200 years, but after the elapsing of those 200 years, the Portuguese rule began to decline. And there were several factors which led to the declining of the Portuguese rule slowly in the mid of the 17th century. Of course, you remember they began by the 15th century, and in the mid of the 17th century, the Portuguese rule in the coastal began to decline. The factors which led to decline include the following. Number one, Portugal, as we earlier said, was a small country with a very small population. Therefore, she was not able to send enough administrators nor raise adequate army to administer her overseas possession. This is the question of not able to raise enough personnel, all right? And like we said, of course, initially, we said this region was so vast, it was big, it was vast, and therefore, raising enough personnel was a challenge. Remember, Portugal was small, all right? Therefore, raising enough personnel to administer that was a challenge. And of course, we talked about the army, adequate army to quell the resistance, and of course take control of the overseas possession was a challenge. And then number two, there was delayed reinforcement due to the distance. Of course, we talked about reinforcement was coming from Goa in India, which was their headquarters. All right. So, but that resistance was not immediately. Why? Because there was the issue of the distance. Traveling all the way from India to East Africa was a long distance. And number two, there was the issue of slowness of travel. The Portuguese could not quell those suppressant rebellions effectively since their reinforcements were not received on time. Okay? So that's also a challenge which they experienced. Therefore, that also contributed in some way to their decline. So those resistance, we can say, they were successful in some way because their enforcement was delayed. And therefore, that led to their decline. Number two, the nature of the Portuguese official. All right? So most of them are served for short periods of time. And they were unscrupulous, greedy, and corrupt. So they were corrupt in nature. All right? Therefore, that means when they came into rule, they took the short time that they were there for personal gain. They were corrupt. They gathered a lot of wealth for themselves, and therefore, as a result, it was detrimental to the administration of their rule in East Africa. Therefore, they never had enough resources. And then there is number four, the Portugal annexation by Spain between 1580 to 1640. You realize that Spain was annexed. In other words, was put together, was annexed. Okay? Annexation by Spain between 1580 and 1640. This in some way weakened Portugal's control over her trading colonies as her attention was diverted back home. In other words, what we are saying here, Spain tried to colonize Portugal and therefore tried to annex. And we said annexing is like connecting, joining them together to form one thing. And therefore, in that process, you realize their concentration changed from controlling East Africa to emancipating themselves from that annexation by Spain. And therefore, their attention was diverted back home. And that also became detrimental to their rule and in some way contributed to their decline in East African coast control. And then number five, the Portuguese administration suffered tropical diseases. We said earlier that tropical diseases that are found majorly along the tropics in Africa. And we gave examples of diseases like malaria and diseases which are induced by vectors like tsetse flies. So as a result, they were weakened and some, of course, died in the process. And that, of course, acted also in detriment to their rule in East Africa. And then number six, the Portuguese had a negative attitude and they were unfriendly towards the local people. And that's a mistake they did. Because you see, if you want to control somebody in some way, you have to be friendly. You have to create a relationship. You have to create a positive attitude. And so you realize the Portuguese, they had a negative attitude and they were unfriendly. And therefore, the local people in return resisted. Okay? So, and that also acted in detriment of their rule in the East African coast. Number seven, another reason which led to their decline is the Portuguese had inadequate resources and finances. This is a very vast area, 400 kilometers. It's a vast area. And therefore, for this area to be adequately and effectively administered, there must be resources and finances. Finances to pay administrators, finances to pay the military, and all those who are involved in those expeditions. And therefore, because they had inadequate, they could not be able to sustain that role for long. Another reason is that there was frequent rebellion by the coastal people. All right? Those rebellions were frequent, one after another. So if they quelled a rebellion today, 2 weeks down the line, there is another rebellion. So those frequent rebellions by the coastal people had to divert their resources in suppressing the rebellion. So they invested much in purchasing of weapons, purchasing of the correct armament, paying of the military. So they diverted their resources, which they got from the trade which they carried out and all that, to suppressing the rebellions. And that, of course, in some way was in detriment of their rule and led to their declining. And then we had also the invasion by the Zimba warriors in the year 1588 from Mozambique, left the towns virtually deserted. So these Zimba warriors, they were believed to be cannibal. They were eating people. They ate people in that case. So they attacked the Portuguese people and ate them. All right. So these Zimba warriors in 1588 from Mozambique left the towns virtually. They scared the Portuguese, and the Portuguese left. And that in some way left the towns deserted. In other words, the people fled, leaving the towns empty. Number 10, the coming of other European powers in the 16th century. So you realize that after the coming of the Portuguese, now it's happening like they're opening up the East African coast. So other European powers are coming in the 16th century. And therefore this challenged and threatened the Portuguese monopoly in the East Coast trade. So it challenged their control, the monopoly of their trade, and therefore they were able, to be overcome and conquered eventually. And then you realize now that another reason why they were easily defeated or led to the decline is that the invasion of the East Coast by Muslims in 1588. And we're going to discuss in detail eventually when we shall be looking at the coming of the Omani Arabs. So the invasion of the East African coast by Muslim nations in 1588 also was to their detriment. In 1652, we had the Omani Arabs. So the an invading fleet from Omani destroyed Portuguese possessions in Zanzibar and Pate by this time. Okay, so those Arabs are coming in slowly, and we'll see eventually they'll come and take control of the trade. They'll come and take control of the East African coast. So in 1652, the Omani Arabs are coming, and at their coming, they were able to control the following areas. Number one, they took Zanzibar and Pate. So these were they were very key areas in as far as trade was concerned. Zanzibar was very key in as far as trade is concerned. So they are coming, invading, and taking control is of detriment to the Arabs, to the Portuguese, sorry. Then lastly, but not least, in the year 1698, this marked the end. In 1698, Fort Jesus was put under siege. It was captured. So the seizure of Fort Jesus in 1698 marked the end of the Portuguese rule at the East Coast. All right? So basically, those are the reasons which led to the decline of the Portuguese rule in the East African coast. So we have looked into detail on those reasons which led to their decline. And now in our next lesson, we shall be able to explore and look at the impact. In other words, we shall be looking at the results. And like we say initially, the results are usually classified into positive and negative. So we'll be looking on both results or impacts on the people of East African coast. So for today, that marks the end of our lesson. Take care of yourself. Let's meet in our next lesson. Goodbye.